My story is pretty long, and it's honestly a tragic one. I wouldn't want anyone to experience the things I've been through, not even those I wanted revenge on. I'll have to share some things about myself that I'm not proud of, and would rather keep to myself. When I was 19, my dad got diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. It was a tough time for us because my mom had to work long hours, 9 to 9, and I ended up taking care of him. He fought hard for 4 years, but unfortunately, he didn't make it after a triple bypass surgery. Losing my dad had a huge impact on my mom, and I tried to be strong for both of us. Those were really dark times, and they changed me completely. I couldn't focus on school, and my grades suffered. I had to get an after-school job to support my mom, who was a wreck after losing my dad. Something inside me changed during all this. Before all this happened, I led a somewhat sheltered life because I regularly attended church and church activities. But when my dad passed away, everything changed. If I wanted to go to college, I had to figure out a way to pay for it myself. The situation at home and the constant need for extra money meant I couldn't qualify for any loans. The job I had paid minimum wage, and it barely got us anywhere financially. During this difficult time, a friend introduced me to pills, which made things even more complicated. He said that if I needed some extra cash, I could work with him and his buddies. They were involved in selling pills, and eventually, I started delivering coke for them. After a few months of doing this, I managed to save enough money. I used that money to get through high school and pay for my college. I spent a few years in college, and during that time, I didn't show off or waste money to impress anyone. I kept a low profile and finished my bachelor's degree in 3 years because I had plenty of free time. At first I wanted to become a lawyer, but I knew too many corrupt cops and officials who were pushing pills. I studied law, but I didn't plan on passing the bar because I decided to become a paralegal instead. In college, I reconnected with a high school classmate named Rita. We were close back in high school and, as it turned out, we had crushes on each other, but were too shy to admit it at the time. Long story short, Rita and I became best friends and eventually fell deeply in love. We were making plans for our future together. Both of us had been in failed relationships before. Mine, especially, had left me feeling emotionally numb, like I couldn't love again. It had been years since I deliberately dated anyone. My ex, let's call her Becky, did some heartless things that led to our breakup. I treated her well, helping her escape an insulting relationship and never being cruel to her. I taught her that no one deserves to be used, but she left me feeling shattered and devastated. Then I met Rita, and she brought hope back into my life. It made me realize that all my past relationships had let me down. Rita was the love of my life, and I knew we were meant to be together. We took things slow at first, but as 2 years passed, I opened up more and more to her. I shared with her what had happened with Becky and everything about my dad and more. Rita showed so much understanding and empathy. We started sleeping together and eventually became a couple. She appreciated that I truly listened, spoke honestly, and looked out for her. I said I loved her, and she said it back. There were some things from my past that I never told her, like how I paid for college and the things I experienced. I was scared it might ruin things between us. Despite that, we loved each other and had plans to start a family. Then, a few months later, a terrible disaster struck. My mom had a horrible accident. A large shelving unit fell on her, leaving her badly injured. The neighbors rushed her to the hospital, where they discovered she had a leaking heart valve along with many other injuries and broken bones. They did some tests to check if they could fix the valve, and a week later, we received good news that they could replace it. Unfortunately, they also found some bad news during the tests. They discovered 5 small masses around her left kidney, and the chances were high that they were tumors and cancerous. They did a biopsy, which confirmed that she had renal kidney cancer. She started treatment, and I knew I had to be there for my mother. Things were going well with Rita. We had moved in together to a town about 30 miles away from my mom's place. When I told Rita about my mother's condition, she showed concern and support. I was worried that this situation might affect our relationship, but she assured me that she didn't want to put things on hold. She said she would be there for me, offering emotional support. I told her that if she ever needed a break or felt interested in someone else, she should tell me, and I would understand. But she assured me that she valued me and that no one could replace me. As my mom started chemo, things seemed to be going okay at first without severe side effects. However, after about 2 months, she began experiencing weakness and a loss of appetite. Throughout this time, I kept in touch with Rita through calls and texts multiple times a day. Every single day, she would message me, asking about my mom as soon as she woke up in the morning. We often spent hours talking and sharing how much we missed each other before falling asleep. We could see each other and spend the night together about every 2 weeks, and during those times, everything felt great. But my mom's condition got worse, so I told Rita she could go out with her friends and enjoy life. As summer started, the new Rita loved going to outdoor activities, even when I couldn't join her due to my mom's health. I enjoyed hearing about the fun things she did with her friends, and I was happy that she didn't isolate herself because of what I was going through. Rita always showed concern and sadness whenever I updated her about my mom's situation. The chemo was working to remove the cancer cells, but my mom was getting weaker and weaker. I realized that it wasn't the cancer destroying her anymore, it was the medicine. I knew I needed a break, so some of my mom's friends came to keep her company, giving me a bit of free time for myself. I called Rita and let her know I was on my way to her town. She told me where to find her and her friends. When I arrived, I saw most of her friends, whom I had already met before. As I made my way through the house to the back deck, I noticed a guy sitting close to Rita. They were both laughing and having a good time with their other friends. Rita introduced me to this guy named Henry as her boyfriend. He gave me a strong handshake and said he was happy to meet me. I was polite to him, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about him. Maybe it's because of my past criminal activities that I've become more attuned to sensing suspicious people. It takes one to know one, they say. My gut told me there was something shady about Henry. He was new to their friend group, and none of them, including Rita, had known him for more than a couple of months. Just to be clear, I wasn't feeling jealous at that moment, as I realize now. Rita had other male friends, and I genuinely liked them all. It was just that there was something about Henry that didn't sit right with me. I tried to brush it off, thinking maybe it was just my own jealousy talking. So I engaged in conversations with Rita and her friends, trying to distract myself and ease my mind. I observed Henry from a distance and interacted with him in a friendly manner. That night, Rita and I stayed at her place before I had to head home. Over the next few weeks, my mom's condition kept getting worse, but Rita and I continued to talk and text each other every day. Looking back, I now realize that I was the one initiating most of our communication, but back then, I didn't really keep track of it. One day, some relatives offered to take care of my mom to give me a break. So, I called Rita and told her I was on my way to see her. She mentioned the restaurant where she and her friends were having dinner, so I headed there. As I pulled into a parking spot, I saw Henry getting into a black Buick, but he didn't notice me because he wasn't familiar with my car. Inside the restaurant, Rita and her friends greeted me warmly with hugs and words of sympathy and encouragement. We had dinner and a few drinks together before Rita and I went back to her place. Before going to bed, I casually asked Rita why Henry left before I could say hello. She had no idea and wasn't even sure if he had been at the restaurant. The place we ate at was in a strip mall with other businesses, so I thought maybe he came from one of those stores. Anyway, neither Rita nor her friends had seen him there. I stayed with Rita again that night before heading back to my place around noon the next day. Then, my mom's condition took a turn for the worse, and she became critically ill. An ambulance had to transport her to the hospital. She had pneumonia and was extremely weak from the chemo, making her susceptible to various ailments for about 3 weeks. My mom got hospitalized, and they started giving her medications through an IV, but her condition kept getting worse every day. It was really tough to see her like that. Finally, the doctors told me she had, at most, a week to live. I knew she wouldn't want to spend her last days in that gloomy hospital room, so they arranged to bring her home, where I could make her last moments as peaceful as possible. Once everything was set up, we brought my mom home. She was extremely weak, but it made her happy to be back in her own house and familiar surroundings. We both knew time was running out. Though scared, she wanted to be strong and was ready to reunite with my dad after so many years. I asked one of my mom's church friends to take care of her for a while. Then I drove to see Rita without calling first. I couldn't bring myself to call because I was too overwhelmed and crying hard seeing my mom suffer. I knew Rita would understand and comfort me when I got there. As I reached Rita's house, I noticed a black Buick parked behind her car, but I didn't think much of it at the time. I was too focused on the impending loss of my dear mother. I used the key Rita had given me to enter through the kitchen, like we always did. As soon as the door opened, I heard music playing, but I didn't pay much attention to it because I didn't see anyone in the living room or on the back porch. However, as I walked down the hallway toward her bedroom, I heard noises coming from inside, and I paused. I reached for the doorknob, then stopped again. It hit me that the sounds I heard were sexual. My heart sank even further, and I quickly pulled my hand back, not wanting to be noticed. But after a moment, I mustered the courage to unlock the door and open it. There was a creak, and as I looked inside, I saw them completely naked, going at it without a care, completely unaware of my presence. Honestly, my first impulse was to charge at him and give him a good punch in the face, but I knew I had to keep out of trouble for my mom's sake and my job. So I backed away slowly, my anger boiling inside me. I left the house quietly through the back and sat in my car. The weight of everything hit me hard, and I started sobbing uncontrollably. I didn't want to be seen in that state. After about half an hour, I started the car and headed back to my mom's place. I didn't tell anyone what I had just witnessed. They all assumed my tears were solely because of my mom's situation, which of course was partly true. But the betrayal I had just seen was so hurtful and cruel that it was difficult to comprehend. I knew my mom was my top priority, especially since she was nearing the end. But I felt so betrayed by Rita. I was consumed by a rage I'd never felt before. And believe me, I've experienced plenty of anger. Part of me wanted to call her and let her know what I saw, giving her a piece of my mind. But I figured, if she didn't care enough to be faithful while my mom was on her deathbed, cursing her out wouldn't make a difference. After making sure my mom was comfortable, I tried to sleep in my old childhood room. I cried myself to sleep, woke up crying, and continued crying throughout the night. When my phone rang in the morning, I saw it was Rita calling, but I ignored it. I had to resist the urge to throw the phone against the wall in anger. I went to check on my mom, who was in a deep sleep because of the morphine they gave her. I managed to text Rita back, telling her I was really busy with my mom and would call her later. Then, I forced myself to eat and take a shower. The hospice nurses came by to check on my mom's condition. After checking her vital signs, they told me she had about 48 hours left to live. I thanked them and went out into the backyard, trying not to lose my mind with everything that had happened and was about to happen. I texted Rita, letting her know my mother's condition was about the same, but I didn't want to see her right now. I really didn't want to talk to Rita or have her show up. I felt like I owed it to my mom to make her last moments as peaceful as possible, so I focused on that the next evening. At around 6 p.m., my mom took her final breath with me holding her hand, and it was a heartbreaking moment. Over the next 3 days, I was busy with meetings with her pastor and finalizing the details for the church service and burial. However, I couldn't shake off the images of Rita and Henry being intimate right in front of me. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. I was furious with Rita, but the fact that Henry had acted overly friendly with me made me even more enraged. I couldn't help but wonder if they were already involved or about to be when I first met him. That made me really want to know who he really was. So, I decided to hire a private investigator, PI, to run a background check on Henry. I had this gut feeling from the moment I met him that he was bad news, and I was upset with myself for not trusting my instincts. The PI, who happened to be a friend from my workplace, got back to me after a week with a file on Henry. It had mugshots of him from many years ago. I've had my share of trouble in the past and done some regrettable things in my life. I've known people who intentionally did terrible things, especially under the influence of pills and substances. But Henry had a long list of crimes, including several DWIs, reckless driving, receiving stolen goods, and even breaking and entering. His record also showed pills arrests, and they got worse as you went down the list. I found out he had been out on early probation for about 2 years after serving a 10-year prison sentence. When I saw the charges for sexual offenses, I was utterly disgusted. Rita's betrayal already hurt, but knowing she might have put me at risk was even worse. The thought of what diseases that felon might have as a physical offender, and from his time in prison, made me feel physically sick. I doubted Rita had any clue about who she was involved with behind my back. She had a naive and trusting nature that had caused her problems before, but nothing like this. Anyone who knew about Henry's record would have seen him as a vile creature. He should have never been let out of prison. But I had to focus on my mom's funeral and pull myself together. After the funeral, when everyone had left and I was exhausted and emotionally drained, I tried to sleep. Then Rita called, not knowing that my mom had passed or that I knew about what she had been doing. Before my discovery, she had been texting and calling me much less. When she called, I tried my best to sound happy to hear from her, even though I didn't let on that anything had changed with my mom's condition, or that I knew about her and Henry, or what I had found out about him. I just let her do most of the talking and pretended to believe every lie she told, acting as if I totally believed her and appreciated her false sympathy when she said she missed me. When we said goodbye, I lied and told her the same. But to be honest, I wouldn't have cared at all if she was gone at that moment. I got a few weeks off from work for bereavement. I knew things with Rita were completely done, but part of me struggled with how cruelly she had treated me, whether it was intentional or not. On one hand, I was glad to know the truth about her and Henry before any more lies and betrayal could happen. But on the other hand, I felt that what they both did to me, at a time when I was already struggling, was just plain wrong. I wanted revenge. I wanted to ruin both of their lives without them ever knowing I had anything to do with it. So, I called my Human Resources Department and filled out the necessary paperwork for FMLA, Family Medical Leave Act, to stay out of work longer than the given 2 weeks. Honestly, I had no reason to worry about getting fired, but I took the legal route and had enough money saved up to cover my bills for at least half a year, maybe more if needed. I was determined to get my revenge on Henry, and it turned out to be quite easy. Since he was on parole and a felon, even a minor charge could send him back to prison to finish his original sentence. But that wasn't enough for me. I wanted to hit him hard with new charges that would keep him locked up for a long time, never to see freedom again. I had met Henry's parole officer on several occasions, and she knew me well enough that if I had called her, she would have looked into his felonies. With his record, I knew he'd have a tough time finding a job, and I doubted he was working something legal to afford a new Buick and insurance. So, I parked my car, which Rita wouldn't recognize, down the street from her place. When I saw Henry's Buick in her driveway, I waited in silence until around 2 a.m. when I heard him start his engine and leave. I followed him casually, making sure not to raise any suspicions. It was time for me to do some digging of my own while keeping a reasonable distance. The signal led me to a rundown house in a below-average part of Rita's town. His car was already parked, and he had gone inside. I jotted down the license plate number and parked my car down the street. I took a few hours nap while keeping an eye on his house, but there was no activity. I woke up around 8 in the morning, got out of the car and grabbed some breakfast. As the day went on, it became clear whether Henry had a big group of friends who came and went quickly, or if he was dealing with highly obsessive substances like coke, junk, or ice. After a while, many customers returned for more pills, making it obvious he was selling. I took photos of the cars that stopped by and shot some videos to document the activity. I went back each day around the same time to keep track of his ongoing dealings. I also watched each night at around 6 p.m. when Rita finished work. Henry would leave his house, and I followed him to see him meet Rita at a restaurant or head straight to her place. I seriously doubted she had ever been to his house, at least not that specific one. I had gathered enough evidence to turn into the local police, but I wanted to document his activities for one more day since I knew he hadn't restocked his pills to sell on that last day. I kept watch around 3 p.m., and I noticed that people had stopped coming by, which was unusual. I sat there and watched for a while. About 30 minutes later, a big black Cadillac Escalade pulled into Henry's driveway. Usually, only one person would get out of a car to go inside his house, but this time, I saw 3 large guys come out of the Escalade and help a middle-aged man inside. They stayed in Henry's house for over 2 hours, which was unusual. I was pretty sure that middle-aged man was the source of the pills Henry was selling. I drove by and took a picture of the Escalade's license plate when it was parked at home. Later, I downloaded all the photos and videos I had taken of Henry's activities onto my computer. Then, I made a detailed report, documenting what I had observed over the 4 days. Once I was done, I printed out 38 pages of photos showing people going to Henry's door to buy pills. I saved all the video recordings on a SIM card and put it in a small plastic box to keep it safe. I knew I had enough evidence to convince the police about what Henry was up to. I had timestamps on each photo and video, making it real and admissible in court. But I wanted to make sure the police took serious action against him. So, the next morning, I went to the police station in Rita's town and asked to speak with someone in their pills division calmly. A cop in uniform came out from the office and we shook hands. I handed him one of my business cards, and he looked at it for a few seconds, probably recognizing the clout it carried, even if I hadn't passed the bar exam yet. I told him I had some info he might want to see. He seemed happy and led me to a conference room, where we chatted about people we both knew. But then I slid a folder with paperwork and the SIM card across the table to him. The first page had Henry's name, date of birth, criminal record, and parole officer listed. The detective looked at the photos and stayed quiet. His expressions said it all. He knew this information could easily lead to an arrest warrant for Henry. But he probably also saw the opportunity to get a lot of narcotics off the street, possible promotions, and other benefits. He thanked me for the evidence and placed the folder back on the table. Then he asked if I'd be willing to testify. I told him the evidence was so damning that I probably wouldn't need to. He smiled and casually asked if there was anything else I needed. I explained that I felt Henry had been released from prison too soon and clearly hadn't been rehabilitated. He deserved to go back to jail for much longer. The detective agreed, but wanted to know what I wanted in return for the information. I showed him a photo of the black Escalade with the license plate number and told him to write it down for himself. I mentioned that the owner of the Escalade might be an even bigger pills dealer. I emphasized that I wanted to stay anonymous in all police and court reports, and he agreed. Then, I came up with a little white lie, saying my law firm was representing someone who might have been set up by the owner of the Escalade. He knew I could have asked one of the lawyers at my firm for the info, but they don't like to use their favors often. The detective thought about it for a moment, realizing I had given him another lead to follow. I had done more detective work in 5 days than his whole team in months, and he was happy to agree. A short while later, he handed me a printout with the owner's name and address from the tag. I put it in my pocket, thanked the detective, and we chatted a bit more about sports and cars before I left. I drove home knowing that a judge would soon be signing an arrest warrant for that scumbag Henry. After a few days, I kept to myself, checking the arrest reports in the local paper online. One morning there it was, a photo of a bewildered and confused Henry getting arrested, led away in handcuffs. If no stupid errors were made to get him off on some technicality, he'd be serving his original sentence plus many more years. But there was always a chance he could find a good lawyer to reduce the charges or find a loophole to get away with it. I couldn't let that happen, and I wouldn't. I hadn't been driving for more than 10 minutes when my phone rang, and the caller ID showed it was Rita calling. I tried to act surprised and happy to hear from her, without even giving a friendly greeting. She asked how I didn't let her know that my mother had passed away, as she had seen the obituary in the newspaper. I replied that it seemed like she was busy enjoying life, and I didn't want to burden her with my grief. I quickly asked her why she hadn't been texting or calling as much lately, and she changed the subject, asking to see me. I did my best to act happy to hear from her, and told her that I missed her. I asked if she could meet me for dinner at our favorite restaurant in town, and she readily agreed since Henry was out of the picture. She was happy to have me back and filling the void. I went to dinner with her, smiling and giving her a long hug, trying my best to hide the urge to break her spine for what she did. I was surprised she didn't say anything when I avoided kissing her. I guess she assumed my grief made me less interested in romance. I knew exactly where her mouth had been, and I didn't want any of Henry's prison germs on me. We sat at the bar and ordered drinks from our favorite bartender who knew us as a couple. I excused myself to the restroom and sent a message on my phone, asking the bartender to make my drinks without alcohol and hers double. When I returned, I sat next to Rita, discussing drinks and acting as if I was checking out a recipe for a special drink. The bartender came over and asked if we were ready for another round. I showed him the message, saying we were celebrating after not seeing each other for a while. He read it, smiled, and agreed to make the special drink I requested. I'm sure both the bartender and Rita assumed she could drink as much as she wanted, and that she'd be going home with me afterward. I had a different agenda in mind, and acted like her drink was strong. I pretended mine hardly had any alcohol in it. We kept ordering more drinks, and Rita started commenting on how drunk she felt. I acted surprised, saying I barely felt a buzz. After a few hours, I paid for everything with a generous tip. As we left the restaurant, I faked an important phone call and said I had to rush back to my town for work. The next morning, I asked Rita to wait for me at her house while I ran a quick errand. I watched her drive off, and then I called the police, telling them I saw a drunk driver leaving the restaurant. I urged them to act quickly, knowing she would be pulled over for a DWI. I drove to Rita's house, about a mile away from where she got pulled over. I saw the blue lights ahead and knew my plan was working. What neither she nor I knew was that Henry had been using her car to distribute pills to low-level dealers under him. They did the usual search of Rita's car and found a stash of coke hidden under the back seat. I never intended to get her arrested for pills possession and selling, but the fact that she had given me her spare car key the same night she gave me her spare house key made me realize I could have easily messed up my life as well. At that time, she had no clue that I already knew about her cheating, which later became public knowledge. Later that day, I got a call from an unfamiliar number. It was Rita crying and trying to tell me something. I managed to calm her down and listened to what she had to say. She told me she was in jail, and I genuinely acted surprised, asking her what happened. When she revealed it was for pills-related charges, I was shocked. She asked me to help her get out and post bail. I explained that since my mom had passed away, I couldn't risk using any of my property for collateral due to legal issues. Even though I could have used my own home as collateral, I saw her pills charges as a consequence of her actions, and she had already caused enough damage to my life. The charges for possession of coke with intent to distribute meant she would be facing mandatory time. After all the pain she caused me and the person she betrayed me with, I couldn't help but feel a part of her deserved the consequences coming her way. I attended her arraignment, trying to blend in and not be noticed as she walked into the courtroom. But she saw me. I put on a look of confusion, as if I had no idea why she would be arrested for such a crime. Deep down, I knew exactly why, but I had to act like I had no clue. She tried to explain to the judge that her boyfriend had been caught dealing pills just a few days before, so it must have been his. The judge wasn't buying it. She turned to look at me, filled with shame and tears in her eyes, knowing that I knew about her infidelity. I shook my head in disgust as they took her away. She knew there was no point in ever trying to contact me again. They set a high bond for both her and Henry, but he decided to plead guilty and skip the trial, hoping for some leniency. He didn't get any. Rita's trial happened a few weeks later, and she took a plea deal. She got 4 years with a possibility of parole in 3, but her career was ruined once she got out. And I couldn't care less. They messed with the worst person they could have crossed at the absolute worst time to do so. My wife and I are both 49 years old, and we reside in South America. Recently, I've been searching online for a platform to express my frustration, particularly among people who have gone through similar experiences to mine. The reason for this is that I've just discovered that my wife, whom I've been married to for 28 years, was having an affair with a 24-year-old. I can't help but wonder how common this situation is because, had it not been for my neighbor confiding in me, I might never have known, and her affair might have continued unnoticed. We have a 19-year-old son and a 21-year-old daughter, both of whom are in college and living away from home. Our residence is situated in an affluent area. While I wouldn't describe myself as wealthy, I do come from a background of financial comfort. I hold down a modest job, and the same goes for my wife. She works as a manager at a textile company, overseeing a team, most of whom are in their 20s. Everything changed dramatically for me 2 weeks ago. It was a Friday, and I had just pulled into my driveway after work when my next-door neighbor approached me. He invited me to his house to watch a soccer game the following day, explaining that he had something important to discuss with me. I found this quite unusual since we weren't particularly close friends. We had hung out a couple of times during neighborhood events, exchanged greetings, and engaged in small talk when our paths crossed. He's around my age, but his kids are much younger than mine. He's one of those peculiar guys who jog around every morning as if they're training for a marathon. My wife and I used to tease him because he seemed to have an outfit for every occasion. One day he'd be running in matching attire, and the next day he'd be all decked out in his cyclist gear, pedaling away as if he were preparing for the Tour de France. I was a bit apprehensive because I wasn't sure what he had in mind. I assumed he might be trying to sell me something since I knew he worked in sales, or perhaps he had some investment he wanted to discuss with me. So the following day, a Saturday when I usually had little to do in the evenings except exercise when I felt motivated, I decided to take him up on his offer. He welcomed me into his home, and we settled down to watch a European Premier League game, which wasn't something I typically followed. I took a seat on his couch, and he had a beer ready for me. It was just the two of us since his wife and kids were not at home. After a few minutes into the game, he shifted the conversation and mentioned that he wanted to share something with me that might upset me, but he believed, as a man, he had a responsibility to inform me. I was thinking, here comes the sales pitch. But then he showed me a series of startling photos on his phone. These pictures featured my wife and a young man walking hand in hand at a shopping mall. He displayed 5 pictures from various angles, explaining that he had taken them 3 weeks ago while he was shopping with his own kids. Initially, he hesitated to share them with me for 3 reasons. 1, we weren't close. 2, he thought it wasn't his business. And 3, he wasn't aware of the nature of my relationship with my wife. However, as time passed, he felt compelled to share this unsettling information with me. It became increasingly difficult for him to greet me, knowing that my wife might be having an affair with another man. Initially, I experienced a whirlwind of emotions: confusion, embarrassment, and then anger towards my neighbor. I thought he might be playing a prank on me, but it quickly became apparent that he was dead serious, and the person in the pictures was unmistakably my wife. I must have stared at those images for minutes, desperately searching for some explanation to shield myself from the shame and to uphold a facade of masculinity in front of my neighbor. But my emotional mask crumbled. I couldn't restrain myself. The evidence was crystal clear. My wife was indeed having an affair with a younger man. I didn't want to accept it. I tried to convince myself there had been some terrible misunderstanding. Up to that point, I hadn't picked up on any signs that my wife might have been cheating. Although cheating doesn't seem to capture the depth of this betrayal. Yet, the evidence spoke loudly and clearly. I broke down and cried in my neighbor's house right in front of him. It was incredibly embarrassing in hindsight. I was still at my neighbor's place when my wife returned home. I wasn't sure where she had gone that Saturday evening, but I recalled her telling me she was going out to see some friends, a lie I now knew to be false. My neighbor forwarded the incriminating pictures to my phone, and as I was preparing to leave his house, he insisted on accompanying me back to my house to ensure I didn't do anything I might regret. I initially objected, but he trailed me nonetheless. In hindsight, he likely wanted to ensure I didn't take any rash actions or confront her in a way that could escalate the situation, given my visible anger. I left my neighbor's house with him following closely, my sole focus being on the impending confrontation with my wife. She was in the kitchen when I entered through the garage door. I called her name and showed her the pictures on my phone, demanding to know who the man was that she was holding hands with. She appeared shocked, her gaze darting between me and the neighbor standing behind me, who inquired about what was happening. I insisted she answered the question forcefully. I'd never been offensive to my wife before, but I couldn't say that it didn't cross my mind at that moment. She couldn't deny the pictures. It was impossible, as the images clearly depicted her. I held the phone just inches from her face and repeatedly pressed her to identify the person she was holding hands with. My intensity must have been overwhelming because my neighbor attempted to restrain me. After some hesitation, she attempted to explain herself, stating that it was a 24-year-old subordinate who worked under her. She expressed remorse for everything, but I didn't want to hear it. I instructed her to pack a bag and leave my house. That all occurred a few days ago, and I haven't seen her since that day. However, my neighbor visits occasionally to check on me. I'm typically an introvert and value my privacy. Initially, I didn't appreciate his interference, but without him, I would have been completely unaware, and my unfaithful wife might have continued her affair to this day. For that, I can't express how grateful I am to him. I prefer not to have many friends, but I do have a therapist with whom I share my personal matters. Our children are still in the dark about all of this. I haven't yet been to see my therapist. These days, I only leave the house to go to work. It's been 2 weeks since I've had a proper meal or a restful night's sleep. I spend most of my day drowning my sorrows in alcohol and shedding tears. What should I do? Should I seek a divorce? Should I attempt to salvage my marriage? Should I reach out to my wife? The pain is still unbearable, worse than anything I've ever experienced, but it's somewhat comforting to know there are people here who've gone through similar situations. I understand that I shouldn't be drinking, but sometimes it seems like the only way to numb the pain. My wife texts and calls me almost every day at the same time, but I haven't mustered the courage to answer or read what she has to say. I'm uncertain if I'm ready to hear her side of the story. Currently, she's staying at her parents' house. Our children reside in another state. I haven't heard from them since before I learned about the affair, and it seems my wife hasn't contacted them either. I've reached out to my family and informed them of what transpired. My neighbor invited me for a run this morning, which helped alleviate some stress. I now consider him a friend. There's a strong sense of familiarity between us, almost as if I've known him for years. I'm also scheduled to see my therapist tomorrow. I've been jogging with my neighbor as much as possible. During our runs, he avoids discussing my wife, which is really helping me divert my thoughts. However, it's challenging not to think about it, mostly because I'm torn inside. Part of me wants to attempt reconciliation, but I'm unsure if my wife is even the same person I married anymore. It still feels incredibly surreal. I never imagined I'd need to consult an attorney or worry about STDs from my wife. I wanted to provide a little update on where I stand this morning. I shared what happened with my family the morning after I discovered it. My parents are heartbroken. I've gone through the messages my wife has sent since D-Day. They all express her love for me, apologies for her actions, and pleas for me to take her back. I'm still unsure about it all. If she truly means those words, why did she betray me like she did? My children are still unaware, but they'll be home in a few days as they finish college for the semester. I'm uncertain about how to break the news to them. Today, I have a therapy appointment, and I'm planning to schedule a doctor's visit and consult a divorce lawyer. I'm not certain if divorce is what I want, but I suppose it doesn't hurt to have it considered for the future. I returned from my therapist's appointment. Things remain confusing, but he and this community have guided me in the direction I should take now. While my therapist lacks experience with cheating trauma, he has referred me to someone who does. I'll schedule an appointment with them. He's given me some advice on the next steps, encouraging me to give up drinking, start exercising, and take my time before confronting my wayward wife in person. It's important to ensure I'm emotionally prepared to be in the same environment as she is. Now, addressing some questions I've received. My wife's affair partner is not married. He began working with her last year. He's 24, just a bit older than our daughter. My neighbor caught them holding hands at the mall one day and took some pictures. This morning, I sent her a text outlining my expectations. While I'm still unsure about the course of action I want to take, I made it clear that certain conditions must be met for reconciliation to even be considered. I mentioned that both of us should get tested for STDs. She needs to end her relationship with her affair partner and cease all contact, and she must disclose all the details of their actions together. As of now, I haven't received a response from her. Currently, I'm contemplating whether to confront my wife in person. She's been staying at her parents' house. My wife has responded to my text with all those demands, agreeing to the written timeline, granting access to her devices and social media, ending contact with her affair partner, undergoing an STD screening, and quitting her job. I still intend to consult with a few attorneys just in case. Her parents are already aware of the situation. They found out on the same day I did. She's residing at their place. What I'm uncertain about is whether to verify her written timeline with a polygraph test. I've heard that these tests are often unreliable, and I'm not even sure where to find one in my area. Yesterday marked the first time I saw my wife in person since D-Day. After returning from work, my brother and I visited her parents' house, where she's still staying. It wasn't easy being around her, but following this community's advice, I realized that certain things needed to be discussed and established in person, rather than through text and phone calls. Upon seeing me, her immediate reaction was to burst into tears and attempt to hug me. I promptly halted that and conveyed that physical contact with her is the last thing I desire right now. She appeared hurt by my response. She repeatedly expressed remorse for her mistake, professed her love for me, and insisted that her involvement with her affair partner was just an act. I confronted her about her excuses and made it clear that I didn't want to hear them. I informed her that I'll be consulting a divorce attorney next week to explore my options. I reiterated the steps she needs to take if I am to consider reconciliation with her. I had her send a no-contact message to her affair partner right in front of me and disclose all her social media passwords. She also handed her phone over to me, allowing me to take screenshots of all the texts she exchanged with her affair partner and to check for deleted messages. Being around her was incredibly difficult. Every time she spoke, I felt an urge to yell at her. Now, regarding my own healing process, I've given up drinking and started exercising. My neighbor and I go running in the morning. I've been reading as much as I can get my hands on. While food is still unappealing, I've started eating more than I did last week. She has already resigned from her job, showing me her resignation letter. I even called her workplace to verify her claim. However, she'll still need to work there for another month. Update. My wayward wife came by and handed me her written timeline of events from the day she met her affair partner. I haven't had the time to thoroughly read it. I've just skimmed through it briefly. Honestly, I need to muster the courage to read what she has written. Just reading the first few pages filled my mind with disturbing images of them together. I found a place nearby where we can arrange the polygraph test. I plan to set a date for both of us to go and confront her with the timeline. If she passes the test, I'm considering allowing her to return to the house, but not to sleep in the same room as me. I'd still like to give it a few months to assess what I want to do and observe her actions that might influence my thoughts on reconciliation. I've gone through her phone messages and social media, which was also quite challenging and made me feel physically sick. I noticed that she sent a no-contact message to her affair partner on D-Day in addition to the one I had her send yesterday, so yesterday's message was a reinforcement. I also used a few programs to check for deleted messages, but I didn't find any. However, since I'm not tech-savvy, I plan to ask her during the polygraph test if she deleted any. My wayward wife and I got tested for STDs, and the results came back negative. Right now, I feel like an emotional roller coaster, bouncing from one emotion to the next. One minute I'm a sobbing mess, the next I'm shaking with anger, and then I'm trying to go about my day as if nothing happened. If I don't have anything to occupy my mind, it gets flooded with disturbing images of them being together. An empty mind is the devil's workshop. A month ago, I would have confidently stated that my wife could never deceive me. However, in light of recent events, I've come to realize that cheaters do indeed lie. I used to unquestionably trust everything she said, but now I'm not as certain. I've been going through the timeline, and it's been emotionally challenging. I asked her to be completely open about everything. Her emotions, their flirting, the first kiss, and the details of their encounters. She didn't hold back, and I've had to take frequent breaks. I've only reached the halfway point, and there's still so much to go through. My wife has explained to her affair partner why she's quitting, and it turns out he's lost his job. Today marks 3 weeks since D-Day. I've consulted with a few divorce attorneys to understand my options in case I decide on a divorce. In my country, if infidelity is the grounds for divorce, the cheating spouse forfeits the right to alimony, so that shouldn't be a significant concern. The way a couple's assets are divided depends on their marriage contract. My wife and I have a full separation of goods agreement, meaning everything we own is either mine or hers. If we do get divorced, the division of assets is straightforward. The house is registered in my name, so she wouldn't have a claim to it. There are various paths a divorce could take, and the timeline will depend on how my wayward wife responds. It could range from a week to 2 years. In addition to divorce, I have the option to sue my wayward wife and her affair partner for emotional distress. I'm still unsure about which path to choose, but at least I'm aware of my options now. Regarding everything else happening, my daughter is returning home today. She's still unaware of her mother's affair, but I've already texted her to let her know that her mother is staying at her grandparents' house. I mentioned that something has happened and that I'd like to discuss it with her in person. The past 2 days have been the most challenging since D-Day. Both my daughter and son now know about their mother's affair. My daughter, being the first to return from college, attempted to contact her mother, but apparently she wouldn't reveal anything except that she had done something terrible. When my daughter arrived, I sat down with her and recounted everything I knew. I told her about her mother's affair with a subordinate who's young enough to be her son, and how our neighbor captured them on camera holding hands. She was just as shocked as I was on the day I found out. We embraced and cried together. She asked me what I wanted to do, and I admitted I didn't have a clear plan yet. I mentioned speaking with a divorce attorney, but emphasized that I'm still trying to figure out the next steps. My son returned home yesterday, and I think he took the news even harder than his sister did. I sat down with him and explained everything just as I did with his sister. He erupted in anger, shouting and using derogatory terms to describe his mother. That hurt more than I expected. I don't want my children to lose their mother, despite what she's done. I told him he had every right to be angry with her, but that I didn't want him to refer to her in such a disrespectful way ever again. As of today, both of them are staying home with me and helping out around the house. My wife has attempted to reach them, but they've been ignoring her calls, and she hasn't pushed the matter further. Update. I deeply want my family to be whole again. The past month has unquestionably been the worst of my life, but I've discovered incredible support here. Every morning before work, I've been going out to jog in my neighborhood. I've also started eating full meals again and seeing my new therapist. Although I miss my old therapist and the connection we had, the new therapist has been tremendously helpful in navigating my emotions. My daughter went to visit her mother. Despite her anger, she has expressed her desire to maintain contact with her. My son appears to have been the most deeply affected. He's very upset that I haven't filed for divorce yet, and has harshly criticized his mother. He's even made some hurtful comments like wishing she would pass. I've told him not to use derogatory language even though she's done a terrible thing. She's still his mom. It's challenging to accept that this new behavior is a result of the shock from the discovery and not something that was already there. I never imagined my son would become this kind of person. My son is legally an adult now and I can't force him to do anything. However, I plan to encourage him to seek individual counseling alongside me and his sister. I'll also assert myself when I believe he's being disrespectful to me or his mother. Tomorrow, I'll visit her and have her read the timeline she's written in front of me. I also have a polygraph test scheduled for next Saturday. I'm still considering my options, and I believe these next 2 steps can help me make a decision. In her timeline, she describes how he gave her attention, and she found it exciting. I haven't had a proper discussion with my wife to understand exactly what was going through her mind beyond what she's written down. But if I take her at her word, her affair partner made her feel youthful, and having a forbidden affair aroused her. Seeing her wasn't the most challenging part. I've seen her a few times since D-Day. What was tough was sitting through her reading the timeline. There were moments when I cried, and others when I was filled with anger. I had to ask her to stop a few times because it was getting too overwhelming, and I needed a few minutes to process. She cried throughout the whole process, but I'm uncertain about the sincerity of those tears. She didn't object or try to skip anything. She read through the entire thing. Whenever I asked for more details, she provided them. It took us about 4 hours to get through it. By the end, I was emotionally drained, and it seemed like she was too. I told her that we would revisit these questions during the polygraph test. Again, she didn't object. It appears that she's being genuine, but I'm uncertain about whether to believe her or not. I'm still attending therapy and going running every morning. Sometimes it's challenging to keep disturbing images and dark thoughts at bay, but I'm in a much better place now than I was in the days following D-Day. I'm still undecided about what to do going forward. My wife has started seeing a therapist, and we have the polygraph test tomorrow, so maybe I'll be able to make my decision then. I've prepared a few questions that I want to ask her tomorrow, such as, have you been completely honest with me since I found out about your affair? Is the timeline you've written a comprehensive and truthful account of events? Have you had any other affairs during our marriage? Did you delete any emails or messages on your phone and social media between you and your AP that I haven't seen? Update. I brought my wife back from her parents' house on Saturday. We didn't chat much during the drive, but her body language suggested she was uncomfortable. When we arrived and waited for the examiner, she asked if I was certain about going through with this. I confirmed. She was connected to the machine for about 20 minutes and responded with no to all my questions. Afterward, I drove her back home and left her at her parents' place once more. We didn't converse much on the way back either. I was too fatigued to revisit our earlier discussion about her timeline. She did inquire about my intentions, and I honestly admitted I hadn't decided yet. The results came in on Monday. Evidently, she was telling the truth. I thought this might help me make up my mind, but I'm still uncertain. I can't decide whether to give our marriage another shot or proceed with the divorce. I long for our old life, but she hurt me deeply. She is attending therapy. Our daughter visited her a couple of times, and she has seen her therapist too. I'm unsure if they specialize in infidelity. She did indeed respond yes to the first two questions. My son is struggling with his feelings towards his mom, and it's causing concern. He's angry with me for not divorcing his mom, which is unusual, especially considering how close they were before all this. I'm uncertain if infidelity has affected his personal relationships or if other cultural and environmental factors are at play. Every time I've tried to discuss his reaction, he's shut me out. He refuses to listen, talk about his feelings, or consider therapy to address his pain. Reader comment. To be honest, he views your inability to take action as a sign of weakness. Maybe he anticipates you should respond like a man who won't stand for his wife being used like a plaything by a younger guy. The reality is this young guy got to enjoy your wife without having to deal with the baggage of a long-term marriage. Based on what I know about affairs, he likely had his way with her. Your son wants to witness his dad taking clear-cut action. It's as simple as that. OP reply. I'd argue that having my wife leave our home and consulting a divorce attorney was a decisive move. What follows isn't up to him to decide. I will ultimately make that choice. He doesn't get to dictate what's the best path forward for my life. I'm the only one who can determine the most suitable course of action moving forward. Reader comment. But spending half an hour on a park bench with a cup of coffee, just to assess any progress, might help you clarify your thoughts. OP reply, I believe I can do that. Thanks for the suggestion. It's been nearly a month since my last update here, and my relationship is still struggling. She has done everything I've asked, but I can't shake the thought of her deceiving me and being close with another man. Part of me desires reconciliation, but another part recognizes that I'll never fully recover from her infidelity. I followed a reader's advice and began having weekly meetings with her, mostly in public places like parks and restaurants. Both my kids have returned to college and are no longer at home. My daughter is trying to mend her relationship with her mother, while my son wants nothing to do with her. I've been meeting with my wife every week to monitor her progress. She continues to attend therapy to understand the reasons behind her actions. She claims she doesn't know why she did it, but I'm skeptical. After all, she spent 9 months in an affair, which is a long time to be uncertain about your motives. A somewhat positive surprise is that her therapist recommended she read Not Just Friends by Shirley Glass. We discussed the book and she appears to be making progress, but time will tell. She did resign from her job, and her affair partner lost his job when she disclosed the reason for her departure. I've checked her phone and email a few times. Her affair partner is still blocked, and her recent messages to him were about maintaining no contact. Whenever we've met over the past month to discuss the situation and her actions, she's claimed to be genuinely remorseful. However, I can't help but wonder if she's only remorseful because she got caught. She mentioned attending individual counseling to understand why she allowed herself to engage in the affair. She also cut ties with former friends who were apparently enabling her behavior. A story in itself. She's offered me an open channel to vent or ask questions if I feel the need. During our conversations, there were moments when I became triggered and lashed out at her. Initially, I think she was surprised by my reactions, and she tried to backtrack on the statements that triggered me. But now, when it occurs, she simply listens and lets me express my feelings. We delved into why she had the affair and her emotions during it. She mentioned justifying it as a way to find the closeness she wasn't getting at home. Now she realizes it happened because she wasn't putting effort into our relationship. In the months leading up to her affair, she began to focus heavily on her job. The limited free time she had was mostly spent with friends, leaving little time for us to be together. She acknowledges that during that period, she became self-absorbed and wrongly perceived the decrease in closeness between us as my fault. She's apologized and accepts full responsibility for her choices. She also admitted that even if there were issues in our relationship, she should have communicated with me rather than seeking satisfaction outside of our marriage. I'm not entirely sure how to interpret all of this at the moment. I guess I just wanted to share it with others for now. Reader comment. Did she explain why she was willing to remain in a marriage lacking closeness, as most spouses wouldn't accept that? Or did she discuss how she managed to feel no guilt during the affair? Has she given any insight into why the vows we made when we got married seemed unimportant to her? OP reply. According to her, it didn't happen suddenly. Rather, it built up over several frustrating months. She claims to have been aware of her affair partner's attraction to her for quite some time. He had made flirtatious comments in the past, and due to mounting frustration, she eventually started responding to them. In the beginning, she justified it as just flirting and believed it wouldn't progress further. But when it did, she felt guilty. However, she rationalized it by saying she was finding fulfillment elsewhere. And I should have noticed something was wrong when our intimacy declined without her having to spell it out. During that period, she thought I was the source of her frustration, leading to bitterness. She now acknowledges how twisted her rationalizations were, recognizing her own selfishness and reluctance to voice her concerns earlier. She has repeatedly offered her support, telling me I can talk to her whenever I need. I've sat down with her multiple times to express my feelings about discovering the affair, the 2 months we spent apart, and my thoughts about any potential future with her. On each occasion, she patiently listened and apologized at the end. I'm not entirely sure if there's much more she could do that I'd be receptive to right now. Our weekly meetings only seem to confirm that I may never fully get past it. Nonetheless, we plan to continue to see if time can heal these wounds. My main issue is struggling to trust her, and it's challenging to fall asleep knowing that my wife, who slept next to me, deceived me for 9 months. I suppose I'm holding on because I'm nostalgic for how my family used to be, and I want to ensure I've given reconciliation a fair chance. Reader comment that she prioritized her attraction to a younger man over her marriage vows. OP reply, it's interesting. Those were almost the exact words she used when explaining her thought process that led to cheating. I may not be doing a great job of conveying our conversations. I tend to be concise when discussing upsetting topics or ones with many details. Of course, I can only recount what she told me, and there's still the possibility that she might be lying. She acknowledges that her choice to cheat was entirely her own. What she described as a lack of a love connection was a situation she caused. She was spending a lot of time at work and hanging out with friends. The decrease in closeness, which she used to justify her affair, was a result of her not spending much time at home. She now recognizes it was foolish to blame me for the reduced closeness when she wasn't putting in time with me. These are her words, not mine. Reader comment. Did she genuinely say that while she was involved in the affair and rejecting your advances, she felt bitter toward you because you didn't notice the decline in closeness? OP reply. No, she didn't say that. She mentioned feeling bitter before the affair. Reader comment. I'm curious if she has ever talked to you about her perception of your emotions when you discovered her affair, or what it was like for you when she was away. Can she convey that she understands the pain she caused you? OP reply. She did attempt to start such a conversation. She began by sharing how it pained her to witness my reaction when she read the timeline, and she acknowledged that whatever suffering she endured while we were apart couldn't compare to the pain I must have felt. I ended that discussion before it could go further because I didn't want to discuss my emotions. Reader comment. She knew she could sleep with you whenever she wanted. You were initiating. Nothing was lacking. OP reply. Once again, it seems like I'm not explaining things adequately. She understands that nothing was lacking on my part. She used this as a justification for her affair at the time, but she knows that her decision to cheat was her own failing. Reader comment. She seems to be implying that her emotions, which are subjective and not easily proven, were the cause of her affair. I call nonsense. OP reply. I'm not entirely sure I grasp this statement. If not for her emotions, what other reason would there be for her to cheat? Update. It has been 3 months since the affair, and she is still residing with her parents. I continue to run with my neighbor in the mornings and maintain a healthy diet. Mentally and physically, I feel better than I did before D-Day. I've been delving into self-improvement books and other materials to help me make a final decision about my marriage. She recently secured a new job at a company not far from the house we used to share, which suggests she may be anticipating moving back in soon. Our weekly meetings have been going well for her, but not for me. We've been meeting at various locations like parks and restaurants. She's followed all my requests, though at times I worry I'm giving her false hope. I'm genuinely attempting to rebuild trust, but it's proven more challenging than I expected. Forgiving her has been a struggle, and I thought it would improve with time. Yesterday marked our final meeting, a decision I hadn't shared with her until that moment. Prior to the meeting, I realized I couldn't continue like this. I needed to free myself from the constant reminder that she might cheat again if I let her back in. She broke my trust and confidence, and no matter how many meetings we had, I couldn't overcome that feeling. It seemed like our relationship had reached its end. We chose a secluded park for our meeting because I knew she might cry, beg, and potentially cause a scene, and I wanted to avoid drawing attention. Emotionally, I'm drained and can't continue these meetings. After breaking the news, as expected, she started crying and pleading. I explained how difficult this decision had been, and despite her efforts to regain my trust, I would alternate between feeling fine on my own and then furious at her for deceiving me for 9 months. I emphasized that, for both our sakes, we needed to go separate ways. I would maintain a friendly relationship because she's the mother of my children, but I couldn't trust her or share my bed with her again. I suggested we focus on rebuilding her relationship with my son, but I wouldn't force him. Despite her actions, her infidelity is an issue between her and me. My wife continued to cry, expressing her determination to win me back, but she respected my decision. I reached out to my lawyer today to finalize the divorce petition so I can serve it to her.